So last event. It's really handy for us height challenged people. Hi everybody, it's really nice to see you all. I was just saying that sometimes this final reading of the week sometimes is a little bit of a quieter event, which for me I'm really welcoming. I don't know about you, I've had a really long couple of days. They've been so intellectually gratifying. My brain doesn't quite know what to do, and so I'm just so looking forward to sitting back and hearing our brilliant visiting authors just read us a little bit more of their work, and then I'm going to save some brain space for this play that I've been looking forward to seeing for months, which is taking place in just a little while at 6:30 at the Cherry Art Space downtown. Liza Birkenmeyer's Dr. Ride's American Beach House will be staged there. I hope you all can join us. Let us know if you need a ride. So today, we are going to be joined by Lauren Oyler from Berlin. Once again, round of applause for Lauren. Thank you so much for being here. It's 11 o'clock in Berlin, from what I understand. And then we'll hear from Jenn Shapland and then Alexandra Kleeman. And then, as usual, we will have each of our writers introduced by their student guide, who's been working with them and reading and studying their work all semester long. So we are going to start with Allie, who is Lauren's guide. Can you come on up, Allie?
Hi, Lauren. Where the cameras? So my name is Allie Richter, and I'm a freshman psychology major with minors in counseling and English. I am Lauren Oyler's student guide, and while sadly Lauren cannot be here with us in person, I'm still incredibly excited to be working with her this year and grateful she can be here virtually. Lauren was born in Hurricane, West Virginia, and now divides her time between New York and Berlin. She has co-written 2 books with author Alyssa Mastromonaco and has even ghostwritten for others. Her essays have appeared in many well-known publications, including The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Guardian, and many more. Lauren is known for her witty, trenchant reviews and humorous presence online that shows up directly in her novel. Fake Accounts is Lauren's debut, and as one reviewer from the New York Times beautifully states, it's a novel about social media and its insidious creep into our lives, the way it has reconfigured our behavior, relationships, and perhaps most critically, for the ambitions of this book, the way we think about and relate to ourselves. Fake Accounts is not like anything I've ever read before. Its humor directly shaped by the age of the internet and relatable writing, mixed with its unnamed narrator's self-awareness, allows for a captivating and unexpected reading experience about very real and current themes, including the relentlessness of social media, the politics of radicalism and conspiracy mongering, daring to be vulnerable with one another, and the long road to validation, all things we can relate to and see in our own lives. At times, I found myself at conflict with our unnamed narrator. Oyler does a great job crafting a main character that many of us can see ourselves in, while also finding her manipulative and aloof. Seeing our main character say things like, "I'd have to pretend to feel remorse and ask for forgiveness I didn't really have any use for," or a personal favorite of mine, "I just can't stand the thought of seeming irrationally carried away by emotion and unable to freestyle my way back to the calm waters of reason. I believe it hurts the feminist cause, and worse, makes me personally look bad." These add to the complexity of feelings that arise as a reader. Should we like our main character? Why do we dislike her? Are we ashamed to admit that some of her thoughts are ones we've also had? And now I'm so pleased to introduce Lauren Oyler to the 2022 New Voices Literary Festival.
Thank you so much, Allie. I am going to try to do half as well reading the beginning of Fake Accounts as you just did right now. Yes, so as I said at the beginning, so I don't need to explain anything, here we go. Consensus was the world was ending, or would begin to end soon, if not by exponential environmental catastrophe, then by some combination of nuclear war, the American two-party system, patriarchy, white supremacy, gentrification, globalization, data breaches, and social media. People looked sad on the subway, in the bars. Decisions were questioned, opinions rearranged. The same grave epiphany was dragged around everywhere, We were transitioning from an only retrospectively easy past to an inarguably more difficult future. We were, it could no longer be denied, unstoppably bad. Although the death of any hope for humanity was surely decades in the making, the result of many intersecting systems described forbiddingly well, it was only that short period between the election of a new president and his holding up a hand to serve the people's interests that made clear what had happened, that we were too late. I didn't believe all this necessarily, though as the news got worse and more bizarre, I wavered. I've always been drawn to pragmatism, just not exactly a natural at it. As my brain said, calm down, my heart said, also weirdly calmly. A paradoxical comfort can be found in drama. It was and still is my official position, if you were to ask me at a party or something, that the popular turn to fatalism could be attributed to self-aggrandizement and an ignorance of history. History being characterized by the population's quickness to declare apocalypse finally imminent, despite its permanently delayed arrival. We don't want to die, but we also don't want to do anything challenging, such as what living requires. So the volubility with which certain doom was discussed made a tedious kind of sense. The end of the world would let us have our cake and eat it too. We would have no choice but to die, our potential conveniently unrealizable due to our collapse. Until such time, the illusion that everything was totally pointless now was seductive, particularly as a mantra you could take advantage of when it suited you and then abandon when life actually started to feel alarming. I myself was soon using it to indulge some of my naughtier impulses, by which I mean that in the first hours of the morning in early January, when the sky was still dark and the government still inevitably hurtling, I decided to snoop through my boyfriend's phone while he was asleep. I had never really had the urge to go through another person's things before. After a few disappointing experiences with high school boyfriends' instant message histories, I'd learned that poking around the byproducts of other people's thoughts usually yielded the mundane, the predictable, and the unattractive. Even with men I respected intellectually, I never found myself caring enough to breach their trust. Before Felix, my boyfriends exuded the wholesome, loving, deep down reliability of hot dads on television shows, despite being, as far as I knew, not hot, nor dads, nor on television. Another way of putting this is that before Felix, I had good taste. But over the year and a half we've been together, Felix had revealed himself to be completely unrevealing, insisting over and over as I baited and nagged and implored him to tell me his innermost hopes, fears, and childhood-formed biases, either that there was nothing to tell, or conflictingly, that he told me everything already and it wasn't his fault if I didn't remember it all. It was humiliating and typical, and per the usual narrative, I assumed he was hiding something, probably other women. He almost always slept with his cell phone under his pillow. At first, I thought this was just an arbitrary thing he did, or that it was related to some concern about emergencies transpiring in the night or a previous lack of side table. But after he started acting differently, not strange, just differently, I became certain that he did it because he feared I would read his emails and text messages. That his bedtime cell phone habit predated his change in behavior from funny, somewhat reserved guy to slightly less funny, somewhat more reserved guy didn't matter. Regardless of motive, it was weird to sleep with your cell phone under your pillow, and I'd failed to think about that until his subtle shift in comportment had me examining everything he did in a new light. There wasn't much to go on, but that didn't matter either. Sometimes, lately, when we were texting each other, little ellipses would appear in the chat to indicate Felix was typing to me for an extended period of time, perhaps an entire minute. But then the message would never arrive. He'd have typed whatever it was and deleted it, and instead of sending something less delicate or elaborate in its place, he would just stop talking to me as if we were fighting. This seems like a relatively small thing until it happens to you 12 or 13 times. His password was numerical, long, and as far as I could tell, random. And I was only able to figure it out after weeks of surreptitiously watching him tap it out whenever I could, acquiring new numbers out of sequence one by one. He frequently bragged about not being addicted to his phone, so this took longer than it might have otherwise. especially because we didn't see each other as much as I understood other couples of our status to see each other. We saw each other about once a week, when it should have been at least twice. I was resentful about this. My sense that I was being wronged was more powerful than my growing ambivalence to the relationship, which was surely related to the distance between us he created, but not entirely related to the distance between us he created. So part of it, the snooping, was also, of course, about revenge. I briefly considered trying to place his thumb on the circular depressed fingerprint sensor, which is, as I write this, already becoming obsolete, replaced by facial recognition, which is, of course, even worse. I briefly considered doing this while he was asleep, but I'm not a reckless person. I rarely risk anything I don't already deep down want to lose. I'd had a few other opportunities to act before, when he went to the store to buy beer and forgot his phone on the table, when he was in the shower on one of the rare occasions he stayed long enough to want to bathe in my apartment. His phone was always pulling at me, the way that my phone was always pulling at me, but in a more sinister way. He was private but never thorough, a style I guess might have convinced me that he wasn't hiding anything if I hadn't already been so sure he was. Instead, I considered these lapses either evidence of his incompetence or, more likely, a misdirection strategy. But until that night, I'd been hesitant to pick up the phone and confirm my suspicions. Part of what it was that I tried to avoid, as much out of elementary school habit as out of genuine belief in the importance of collective reciprocity, doing things that I wouldn't want done to me. But a bigger part of it was that I dreaded getting caught, a tense confrontation in which I have to pretend to feel remorse and ask for forgiveness I didn't really have any use for, the relationship being in my mind already basically over, which is almost certainly what I do. I'm not given to screaming fights, especially those that require me to dig in to defend my own questionable honor. I can never come up with any memorable insults, and I tend to come out looking like a shamed child instead of a passionate and self-possessed woman. The righteousness Felix could wield over me if it turned out he wasn't sleeping with other women, the vindication I'd need to justify my sneaky actions, was also discouraging. It would hasten the inevitable breakup, which would be a relief, but I would seem totally pathetic. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Lauren. Hello, my name is Hope Borsick, and I am a junior English education major here at IC. I have had the privilege of reading and studying Jenn Shapland's genre-breaking work of autobiographical criticism, My Autobiography of Carson, McCullers. She has written a plethora of essays featured in the New York Times, New England Review, and Tin House, among others. Shapland currently lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with her partner and 2 cats who she graciously left to join us here for this meeting. Shapland has won the Judy Graham Award for Lesbian Nonfiction and Lambda Literary Award for Lesbian Memoir in 2021. My Autobiography of Carson McCullers is her deep dive into the archives of Carson McCullers' misremembered life. And the result is a rich and enthralling biography mixed with memoir and historical criticism. The memoir's fluid nature allows for McCullers' life story to intertwine beautifully with Shapland's own life and struggles. Shapland describes memoir as a voyeurism of the self. She describes writing the memoir as being perched outside her own windows as she tries to peer inside McCullers. Shapland places herself in McCullers' childhood home in Columbus, Georgia, as well as in the artist retreat at Yaddo, New York, while writing the memoir, both physically and metaphorically perched by the windows of both of their lives. Shapland goes against the current in order to combat the erasure of lesbian experiences that have not only happened to McCullers' story, but many others that require proof for it to be written down or recorded. Shapland explicitly uses language and terminology that may not have been accessible during McCullers' time, but should be applied in hindsight where plainly visible. In an interview with LitHub, Shapland reveals that this book took her 6 or 7 years to write. And with such dedication to historical accuracy and intrinsic questioning, Shapland has laid the groundwork for her readers to be able to say they found themselves in the narrative. As I can say, I found myself in the narrative. And I am so excited to be able to welcome Jenn Shapland herself to the stage.
Thank you so much, Hope. That was awesome. So I'm going to read something new. I'm going to read from my new book, Thin Skin, which comes out next summer. It's a collection of essays. We'll see how it goes. It's a collection of essays that deal with toxicity and boundaries, from the literal chemical legacies of nuclear weapons research in New Mexico, to toxic ideas about fear and white womanhood, to the dissolving boundary between work and the self. So this essay, and I'm going to read from the beginning of it, is called The Meaning of Life. After the plague killed 30 to 40% of the population of Europe, the feudal system really went to shit. Lords couldn't get anyone to harvest their fields because all of a sudden there were so few workers. The surviving laborers worked until they had what they needed, then they stopped working. The workers had the upper hand. The lords needed to put people to work so they could generate capital, and they needed some people to put to work. But they also needed everyone to stop starting their own societies and staging uprisings left and right. The lords found it all very exhausting. They insisted the violence was a threat to their wives, the ladies. They might be kidnapped. The heretics and other sects that formed weren't actually interested in the ladies, they just wanted to live in a fair society. Some were egalitarian, some queer, some proto-socialist or all-out communist. Some refused to work, or worked only to satisfy their needs, or demanded compensation. Confronted with death and the possibility of sudden death, writes Silvia Federici, people no longer cared to work or to abide by social and sexual regulations, but tried to have the best of times, feasting for as long as they could without thought of the future. The heretics had a lot of time on their hands, what with the pandemic and all, so they came up with new ideas, new visions for how to live. But now the lords had a real reason, we need some laborers, and a pretend reason, gotta protect the ladies, to get rid of the troublemakers. They got together with the leaders of the Catholic Church, who were mad that all these heretics weren't paying their tithes or buying indulgences, and they rounded up the bourgeoisie, the beloved middle class, who were frankly sick of all the messy violence and unrest and people questioning their morals and values. And they started to hunt and burn the heretics. The heretics weren't their only problem, alas. In the 13th and 14th centuries, women worked as smiths, butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, hat makers, ale brewers, wool carders, and retailers, Federici writes. They made silk, they were school teachers, they were doctors and surgeons and midwives. They raised children in literal villages, sharing what we consider household labor in communal public settings. The lords needed workers to plow the fields and make the textiles and colonize the rest of the planet so they could accumulate some real unearned capital gains. This meant they needed women to stay home and stop practicing their healing arts and stop pairing off with other women and raise some babies. Babies grow up and become laborers, or wombs in which to produce more laborers. They needed women to stop being independent and doing projects and talking to one another and providing birth control and abortions, that above all. So they came after the healers with a special vengeance. They turned every meaningful part of these women's lives, their skills and communities and independence, into the mark of a witch in a massive terror campaign to scare all the rest of the women out of their lives. They crafted an entire state surveillance system to make sure women didn't terminate their pregnancies, and created the figure of a child-murdering, devil-worshipping monster to encourage everyone to support their efforts. Burning heretics had been so much fun that they started to hunt and burn the women too. And the women hunting really took off because frightening women was in the interest of their goal of increasing the labor force, i.e. producing more babies. I'm cribbing and embellishing from Federici's incredible book, Caliban and the Witch, a Marxist feminist history that reminds us that the witch hunts occurred simultaneously with the colonization and extermination of the populations of the New World, the English enclosures, and the beginning of the slave trade. It doesn't get a lot of airtime, but the witch hunts were one of the foundational events in the construction of the society in which we live and complain today. Amazing how easy it was to get everyone to believe the women were witches, to go along with it. It didn't hurt that Eve was Adam's downfall, that women had been suspects since the creation myth. Unmarried, childless women stood in the way of getting capitalism off the ground, so unmarried women became people to fear. If a woman weren't married to a man, people were happy to believe. Surely she had married the devil and was hoarding penises in the woods, in birds' nests. The newly invented printing press made it possible to spread the word near and far about the devil worship and conveniently recorded these details, like the birds' nests, for posterity. Witches were usually old women who lived alone, some of them on public assistance, some of them widows. They were midwives, childless women, and women made utterly precarious by their unmarried status. They were women who embraced sexuality outside of the confines of marriage and family. The rituals attributed to them all bore the marks of subversion, of turning the known world upside down. Eating human flesh, mass celebrated backwards, counterclockwise dances, gathering at night and outdoors, contrary to the new capitalist work discipline. They burned women for growing vegetables. They burned them for living alone. They burned them for gathering together. They burned them for drying herbs. They burned them for angry looks. This went on for about 400 years. They burned them for birth control. They burned them for performing abortions. They burned them for aging. They burned them for being self-sufficient. They burned them for being childless. They burned them for being queer. They burned queer men too, and anyone not conforming to gender expectations. They would have burned me. They would have burned my mother. Witch hunting ended in much of the world by the 1700s, though it still goes on in countries where capitalism is trying to take hold, where primitive accumulation is underway. The definition of women as demonic beings and the atrocious and humiliating practices to which so many of them were subjected left indelible marks in the collective female psyche and in women's sense of possibilities, writes Federici. The legacies of the witch hunts have been deeply ingrained in every part of what is expected of a woman's life. The witch is a mirror we hold up to her at every age, and the alternative to the witch is the life we condition her for from birth, if she is assigned a female gender: motherhood. When a baby person is born, despite the spectrum of both gender and biological sex, they call it a girl if it looks like it will have the ability to reproduce. This occurs even if the baby's gender is difficult to ascertain, which happens quite frequently. As long as a potential womb is present, writes Anne Foster Sterling, the baby is called female. Medically speaking, a woman is just a womb, a vessel for something else. And from its earliest days, they give that baby womb other babies to take care of and call it play. So from the beginning, the being's selfhood is tied up in bottle feeding and diaper changing, care for others, while the being itself is still in diapers. They give it a Fisher-Price kitchen and some fake makeup to play with. They never let it be itself, have a self. If you grew up in a progressive family and never played with gender-specific toys, they still got to you. You were steeped in it with every movie and TV show and ad you ever saw. That to be alone, to be childless, to be old, to age naturally without makeup or hair dye, to be surrounded by other women, to have any kind of interior-directed project not intended to improve your appearance and your ability to mate with the opposite sex and have more babies that you mysteriously but genuinely so long for, well, you'd better stop all that and get busy, because the baby having is the only thing that will give your life meaning and purpose and value. You are worth nothing to this world without a baby. Even better, too. During the witch hunts, the word hag came into the English language. Its usage was rare before the 16th century. A hag was a repulsive old woman. The image of the hag was crucial for transforming what was once a font of knowledge, cultural memory, and medicine into a force hostile to life, specifically new life. Because she was no longer fertile, the old woman was stripped of her sexual identity and agency in order to vilify and demean all sexual behavior outside of procreation. This demonization of aging women only led to a further deterioration in the conditions of their lives as family life gave priority to child raising at the expense of the care previously provided to the elderly. Folklore worldwide is replete with the image of the hag, from the Slavic Baba Yaga to the Japanese Yama-uba. Chelsea and I saw an exhibit on Japanese demons and ghosts at the Museum of International Folk Art in Santa Fe, and delighted in the depictions of the Yama-uba, their long, scraggly hair, sagging bellies, wrinkled skin. The other demons all had tentacles, or claws, or wings, or frightening weapons. The Yama-uba were just old. Across cultures, the hag is unkempt, aged, childless, and/or in some way threatening to children, rumored to eat them, to kill them. She's repulsive. She lives alone at the margins of society. She's frightening. Today, we might call her a cat lady. To really send the point home, when witches were executed, entire communities were required to gather in public and witness the event. These exhibitions were intended to terrify the rest of the community, including the witches' children, especially their daughters, who, in some cases, would be whipped in front of the stake on which they could see their mother burning alive. Putting women on trial in public during the witch hunts laid the groundwork for them to police each other and eventually themselves. The word gossip changed meaning at this time, from friend to an insult meant to discourage female friendship. Sexualities outside of heteronormative property-owning families were made illegal or sinful, including homosexuality, which in several parts of Europe was still fully accepted during the Renaissance. It was important to confine sex to the family so that property could be transferred smoothly from one generation to the next. They turned our healing powers into cosmetology, skincare. Rather than caring for our own interiors, our focus turned to the surface and to our most crucial role, which we learned to confine ourselves and each other within until we could no longer see beyond it, caring for others. At the time of this writing, a plague is decimating the world's population, and the US is in the midst of a labor crisis, in part because so many people are just plain dead. Women have been driven out of the workforce in great numbers to stay home and care for children, demonstrating capitalism's continued subterranean reliance on women's subjugation, despite decades of so-called progress. Underneath it all, women were still doing the bulk of the labor. Women were still doing the bulk of childcare, and most of all, women still felt the internalized pressure to have children. For the first time in human history, we no longer need to have babies. Those of us who have access to birth control, to abortions, to queer lives, etc. We could be heretics, witches now, if we wanted. A crack has opened in the firmament. We might have a chance to make our own world, or at least to learn from those who've tried. But even as a queer woman, I still feel the pressure. I still feel a need to explain why I don't want something I don't have.
I don't know about y'all, but next fall's a little too long for me to have the rest of that. So, hello, thank you all for coming today. My name is Megan Handley, or Meg, and I'm a junior studying for a dual degree in TV and writing here at MUN. And I'm also lucky to be the student guide for Alexandra Kleeman, a writer of short fiction, novels, and essays who lives in Staten Island, where she's a professor in the MFA program at the New School. Alexandra's CV is an extensive list of recognitions, talks, and other publications, which is far too long and impressive for me to convey today in full. Some of her awards include the Berlin Prize and the Rome Prize, both from last year, and most recently she was named the Guggenheim Fellow. I spent a lot of time with Alexandra's newest book, Something New Under the Sun, which we like to call Snuts in class, a novel that tells the story of a C-list writer and an A-list actress as they are pulled into the machine of Hollywood. But beyond the surface of fame and luxury, there's more brewing. The world outside is burning to dust. Water is completely artificial, now water, and people are losing their minds to a mysterious paranoia. The world of the novel walks the line of reality and ecological dystopia, leaving characters displaced, and as Alexandra says, feeling as though time is a piece of paper folded in half and some unseen hand is drawing its finger across his heart to make the crease. What I admire most about Kleeman, despite her kindness, is her ability to toy with the contemporary perspective in her writing, keeping the audience wondering if their reality might be a little bit more dystopian than it first appeared. As The Guardian's review so perfectly stated, Kleeman creates tensions between the intimate human stories that are the mainstay of literary fiction and the non-human world in which these stories happen. Something New Under the Sun is sun-drenched, sharply observed, and swift-moving. What makes it strange and new is the way the narrative disrupts itself. And after all, what is our world if not disruptive? Is this fiction? Is our world not burning? And with that, I'm pleased to introduce you to Alexandra Kleeman.
Oh my God, I wish I could send that introduction around into the world instead of me. I could walk around. I'm so excited for your novel, and I'm so glad to have met all of you the past few days. I was going to say week, but it's only been a few days, but it's been like 2 weeks of life. Because of the wonderful introduction, I don't need to tell you too much about this book. I'm going to start right from the beginning, and I'm just going to read that first scene where we meet Cassidy Carter. On the palm-sized screen, it looks curiously real, like something he's already seen. She slouches in the drugstore aisle, clawing the skin on the back of her hands, sunglasses black and gleaming in the halogen daylight. This is the girl. A bored blonde, her head at once too big and too little for her whittled-down frame. Smaller than life, shorter than expected, not as pretty. Torso adrift within a pair of creased track shorts and an oversized black sweatshirt with Gucci spelled out in front in serif white letters. The footage has a handheld wobble. From time to time, it sinks behind a shelf and you can hear the sound of breath. She keeps taking a box off the shelf, putting it back, picking it up again. Against the background of sanitary napkins, pregnancy tests, and adult diapers, she looks aimless, misplaced, like a child rehearsing an adult gesture. Patrick Hamlin shields his eyes from the California sun and squints down at the miniature face on screen, shrunken behind oversized lenses. He can't help but feel disrespected, seated off to the side of these production kids, half his age but wearing better clothes. Slim-limbed youths who picked him up at the airport and then detoured without asking to this noisy poolside bar nestled in the crotch of an overpriced hipster hotel. The potted palms by the bar all have smiles painted on their trunks and sultry, cartoonified eyes made to be photographed and uploaded to the feed. Now he's jet-lagged and dehydrated, headachy from drinking a jumbo gin and tonic in the glaring bright, mouth dry and tasting of stale wool as he leans over to watch their video clips on a scuffed-up smartphone. Plastic glasses litter the tabletop as the kids slurp from twin Bloody Marys as tall as a toy poodle. "What is this?" Patrick asks, as the girl in the video fingers the sealed opening of the little box. "What am I seeing?" "You have to start from the beginning to get the full effect," says one of the kids encouragingly, a 20-something in a short-sleeved button-up patterned with small embroidered horseshoes. "Like a horror movie," says the pale, smooth-faced one holding the phone. His arm drifts toward and away from Patrick randomly, making it difficult to follow the tiny happenings on the tiny screen. You need those shots of the suburbs and hedges and mailboxes to prep for the massacre that comes later. When the violence is unleashed, the viewer can't comfort themselves by thinking it's a neighborhood fundamentally different from their own. They've already swallowed the pill. "Like at the beginning of Scream, where she's making popcorn on the stovetop," says the one in the horseshoe shirt. "Yeah, or in Triumph of the Undead Dead, where they're in a used car lot arguing over the price of a station wagon right before they get devoured," says the arm. Devoured? Patrick has no idea what he's supposed to be looking for. The girl on screen is famous, he knows, but he can't imagine why. She has long yellow hair and an overstuffed pout. She could be any teenager at the mall, an expensive mall, riding the escalator up and down in the afternoon stupor, clutching outsized shopping bags that swing slowly in the breeze. In the small, impossibly clear picture, her mouth is set in a stiff line, but somehow he senses that she could burst into tears at any moment. She reminds him of his daughter, or is it a combination of his daughter and his wife? On the screen in his mind, he sees their delicate mouths projected side by side. Lately, whenever he tries to picture their faces, the image won't hold. Involuntarily, the smooth lines tremble and collapse into twists of emotion, the unbeautiful shapes of someone about to cry. Skip ahead, says Horseshoe Shirt to the other. We're losing him. But think about how much of the story we'll lose, the arm argues, if we rush it. The time, boredom, irritation, atmosphere, the texture. So true, but avoiding loss is impossible in a world that struggles to conjure even the basic sense of presence. Capture itself is a form of loss, all a matter of pixels per inch, Horseshoe replies, and they nod at each other solemnly. The video's dragged an inch forward or two. On screen, the girl looks furtively toward the checkout counter, then back down. Silently, she slides a finger under the flap, splits open the little box, wriggles her hand into the aperture in the cardstock. She's peering inside now as she pushes the contents around with the tip of a slender, manicured finger. Now the shot is tightening, honing in on the box, which seems to be full of tampons. The girl deftly slides 3 of them out and pockets them without looking, staring straight ahead in front of her like she's searching for someone on the other side of the room. She's stealing tampons? Patrick asks. Shh, say the kids. The camera lurches into motion as the cameraman steps out from behind the shelves and speaks. Hey, Cassie, what you doing? You gonna take those without paying? His voice is cheerily unfriendly. Smile into the camera. Come on, baby. Cassie looks up, her face soft and surprised for a moment, mouth parted and revealing the tips of 2 adorably large front teeth. Then the features rearrange. What the fuck, growls Cassidy, her grip tightening around the tampon box as it caves in. You guys stake out the maxi pad aisle now? Do you want to hide in my shower and watch me put it in? The cameraman giggles humorlessly. Come on, give us a Cassie Keen Kid Detective salute. Can you do that? The one from the TV show. Cassie lets out a weird, strangled sound. She hurls what's in her hand right at the lens, and a mess of brightly colored cylinders bursts once like big, clumsy confetti as the camera whirls down to the drugstore floor and back up again, seeking her face. What it finds looks ferocious. Press delete, Cassidy says, or I'm appropriating that fucking phone. So this is all being shot on a camera phone, Patrick thinks. Phones, he thinks, are the one thing in the world that seem always to be getting better. Now that the 2 of them are in motion, the incredible resolution of the camera lens seems less equipped to handle all the physical activity. She's coming toward him with her hands out, claw-like, grabbing things off the shelves and hurling them hard at the arms or upper body of the man holding the phone. He tries to keep up the chatter, but it's clear from the lengthening pauses that he's in some degree of pain. He's running into shelves, knocking down prim rows of packaged cookies and crackers, and at the same time, Cassidy Carter has driven him toward the exit-less back of the store and is battering him with a value-sized jug of hypoallergenic laundry detergent. She grips with both hands and swings it like a sledgehammer. A little bracelet on her wrist glitters. She's telling him to give her the phone, but she's saying other things too. Fuck the menstruation industrial complex for making her buy a pack of 24 when all she needs is 1 or 2 to get to the end of her cycle. Fuck America for being a nation-sized landfill run by rednecks who will never in their lives be able to comprehend the actual spiritual profundity of 5 moons of Trident. Fuck all her friends for buying the magazines with the stolen photos of her old Brazilian wax sessions. Her fans are creepy goblins and would chop her into little bits and eat the pieces raw if they could. And they would take a billion photos of it and probably tag her in every single one. By now the phone is on the floor, camera pointed up at Cassidy, who looms over it with a dark expression, her legs long and bronzed and extending impossibly up toward the sky. As she unscrews the lid to the detergent and upends it all over the cameraman's body, Patrick can't help but think that female anger has an outlandish quality to it. In a face rigorously conditioned to be beautiful, ugly feelings come as a violation of basic principles, like the monstrously large species of coconut-eating rat he had read about on the internet, discovered on a tropical island when it fell onto a passing scientist. While she was clubbing the head and back of the cameraman, the lower half of Cassie's face had been screwed into a position of uncontrolled fury. At the same time, the upper half of her face seemed perfectly placid. From the nose up, there was a sort of fragile glamour that you could have fallen in love with on the spot. And it was a truly fantastic nose, actually. Elegant, but wholesome, lightly freckled. It was the sort of nose that reminded you at first of other noses you had loved in days gone by, but then began by degrees to eclipse those other noses until all you could remember was this new nose, perfect and organic and whole. Now, as he watches Cassie shrug off the grasp of the drugstore employees who banded together to try to restrain her, he wonders if there is a tiny childlike version of this woman pointing and laughing within the calm center of her rage. Suddenly, Cassidy grins. With one smooth movement, she reaches down into her track shorts, pulls out the spent tampon, and slings it at the cameraman's prone body. "Namaste," she shouts as she's led away. "And that," says the arm, pausing the clip, "is Cassidy Carter. I can't believe you didn't know who she was. It's as if we found you on a Micronesian island and we're teaching you, what a flashlight is." "She's that famous?" Patrick asks, tilting the last drops of water from his drinking glass onto his sweaty neck. "More. She was a Happy Meal toy. I had 2 when I was growing up. I used to make them karate fight each other." Horseshoe makes rigid motions with his hands. "Okay, she's famous, but she's clearly crazy," says Patrick. "I just don't think any serious film uses an actress who's assaulted someone in public, on video. How could you guarantee that she'd behave herself?" "Crazy is bankable," says the arm, swiveling in his seat until he makes contact with our waitress. He lifts the empty water bottle and points to it with a hand shaped like a gun and holds up 3 fingers. The waitress nods, gives a thumbs up, and rolls her eyes. Patrick stares down at the paused image. The girl is frozen, sandwiched between 2 drugstore employees in red vests who hold her by the elbows. She's looking back toward the camera with a gigantic, diamond-hard smile. With her right hand, she gives a cheery 2-fingered salute, like a Girl Scout, but cuter. "I hear you. I see your point. But I'm going to have to veto her," Patrick says with finality. He leans back in his seat and swigs his diluted gin to punctuate. There's an uncomfortable silence. When the arm speaks, he sounds a couple years older and somber. "Yeah, well, with my regrets, you aren't actually attached to this film with any veto power, per se. I hope you had a chance to look over your contract and the duties and responsibilities outlined, therein." Patrick's head begins to ache a little. He squeezes his eyes open and shut. He looks out at the dull turquoise pool, fully engulfed by the looming shadow of the hotel above. Neon green pool floats rotate aimlessly in the blue. The arm explains patiently. "Your contract stipulates that in exchange for the rights to your novel Elsinore Lane, the access to which is bestowed gratis, you will receive 1 paid production assistant position, budget contingent, which you may bestow at your discretion upon the individual of your choice, including yourself, if you are your own choice." Horseshoe Shirt pats Patrick on the back a few times. "You're one of us, man," he says in a friendly way. The arm gives a tight smile. "Don't shoot," he says, lifting his hands up in mock surrender. "Messenger." The waitress comes with a tray carrying 3 bottles of water, each one folded into a faceted shape resembling a diamond. California sunlight shimmies through the hard plastic, pale and golden at the same time. She places the bottles on the surface in front of them. One by one, she opens each bottle and sets the caps together on the far end of the table. She picks up the bottle in front of Patrick and pours it into his drinking glass. She does the same with the other 2 bottles and glasses. The water tumbles in, cold and transparent and odorless. She looks at the 3 of them sitting in silence and walks away toward another table. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Lauren and Jen and Alexandra, and thank you to the student guides who introduced them and such a wonderful job. Can all the student guides stand up in your shirts? And we cannot do this festival without you. You have been such amazing participants in the scholarly, logistical, sometimes anxiety-prone work of doing this festival, and we are grateful for you. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much to our readers tonight, Lauren, who's I hope asleep now in Berlin, and Jen and Alexandra. It was as electrifying to hear new work as it was to hear the work that we know so well read by the author. It's such a privilege, and I'm so glad that we get to continue the celebration. We do have books for sale, so if anybody wanted to grab one, I know some people have their eye on some books. This is the last chance to buy books by any of our authors. I'll be back there. So grab me quickly if you want to buy a book, and then we are going to find some vehicles and find our way over to the Cherry Art Space for the 6:30 showing of Dr. Ride's American Beach House. Thanks, everybody.
And just one last thing, I want to thank Eleanor. This is 10 years of a festival, and she's the best partner in crime for this and an amazing person to run a festival with.
We're gonna get emo later. I thought we agreed.
I know, but I want to thank you.
This is amazing and has a famous podcast. If you don't know, Burned by Books. Download it wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody. Let's continue. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.